often you really should get an abortion, that it's good for you. That's a morally acceptable and even morally admirable thing to say.
It's just because I respect the right of a woman to partition a fetus from her body. I don't want to overwrite what she feels that she needs to do with her body.
I mean, you mentioned her body. Is it her body, or is that a unique human life?
So he's asking, is it a unique human life? And okay, it's got a unique human genetic code, but does having a human genetic code, whether it's unique or not, different from the mother, does that give it rights such that it would be wrong to end the pregnancy? There's a kind of equivocation going on here, because we often think, well, rights are the rights of individuals, and that's part of what makes individual rights important. But is the kind of uniqueness of the genetic code what makes something an individual? Is that really what generates rights? If so, why? Or is the individuality that matters to rights something else? Something like being physically and physiologically individuated from the mother such that you have an autonomous life of your own. I think those are two very different issues. So if I were answering this question, I would call it out as a loaded question and say, you might mean two different things by this. And one of them is relevant to whether something has rights. One of them isn't. Unique genetic code. What's so special about that? What's the magic in that DNA that generates rights? They're probably not going to have an answer, because what they probably really think is that it's the magic that is given that embryo by God that generates the rights, and then they can't really defend themselves.
Well, they typically kind of say that, well, any other line that you attempt to draw, it applies to the unborn and the born. So if you try to draw it at the heart, right? Well, there's people that are already born that are on pacemakers. If you apply it at consciousness, there's people in coma. So the consistent line to draw would be that human DNA.
And to boost that up one more level is really the fact that these are about humans. That's why we call them human rights.
Yeah, nobody disputes that what the fetus has is human DNA. It's not dog DNA. It's not crocodile DNA. But to say that makes it human is to say, well, okay, it's of the human species, but is it an individual human being with rights? That's a different question. It's a potential individual human being, but it's not an actual human being. And so if you think there's something potential is important about potential there, okay, maybe it's got potential rights, but it doesn't have actual rights. There's value in a potential if you're the mother who wants the child, because you want that potential to be actualized. And so you need to guard it and nourish it. But if we're talking about women who want to have an abortion, they don't want a child, and the potential is not valuable to them. So who's it valuable for? If what we're talking about is the line of conception, which they are usually offering as the most important line, I don't think they're going to reveal that point. But one question you can ask of them is, what's so special about that line? All they can tell you is, well, that's the line at which you get this unique genetic combination. I mean, it's also true of each sperm before it meets with an egg, that it's got a unique genetic combination. Now, it's true that without the egg, it won't get to the point of ever being born. But of course, there are many fertilized eggs that don't get to the point of being born either. It's also not the case that the genetic code that you get at conception is all of what you need to make you who you are. There's a whole separate field called epigenetics, where they're beginning to realize that not everything is cooked into just the DNA. And it's also not like there's that the line of conception is more of a magical bright line than any of the other lines. What's so special about that? There's actually no heavenly choir that starts singing, no light that shines down from the clouds when the moment of conception happens. I mean, they're ultimately motivated by a kind of religious view here.
Human life, it does start at conception. It is a human being inside the mother's womb, and I believe in protecting that, because left to its natural processes, it turns into you and me.
So left to its natural processes, it will turn into you and me. Well, under all the right circumstances. So this is emphasizing the point that there are a lot of pregnancies that end with miscarriage, and that's a totally natural thing. That's not necessarily because of anything that the woman does. So it's not the case that just left to the natural devices, it's always going to lead to a pregnancy. When I used to teach about ethics of abortion in university classes, I would make the point that you wouldn't say that an acorn is an oak tree just because it has oak DNA. It's a potential oak tree, but it's not an actual oak tree. And in the case of the pregnancy, that's gonna turn into a human being. And I'd say no, it's the acorn and the fetus are not really that much different here. There's special circumstances that each of them require in order for that potential to be actualized.
What do you say to the people that go a little bit farther and they take your potential and actual distinction and they say, what I'm talking about here is just like with the fetus and the acorn, there's actually some substance, something we may not know what it is, but we know it's in effect there that allows an acorn to become a tree. And that's what it is, that substance, that human substance or that acorn substance is what they're saying we value and protect.
Well, every potential something is an actual something else. There's no such thing as pure potential. A potential oak is an actual acorn. It is an actual little piece of wood-like stuff with some seed material inside of it. And a potential human is an actual fetus. This is just the way that change works.
What about this claim of the sacredness of life? Do you not think life is sacred? Like, nobody can disagree that life isn't like the most sacred thing like ever. To value anything, you need to value life.
I actually wrote an article called "Abortion Allows Women to Protect What's Sacred About Life" for New Ideal. One of the points that I make in there is that life is sacred to those who want to live it, to those who have it, and who need to be able to make choices if they want to live the one and only life they get. That kind of consideration applies first and foremost to the woman. She's the one with the actual life, which, if she wants to live it, is sacred to her. Life isn't sacred to the universe. It's not sacred to everybody. It's sacred to the person who has it, if it is. And that's not even something that's guaranteed. Some people don't want to live. What's sacred about it is once you get the chance, it's the only opportunity that you've got. And you don't want to blow it. The fetus, the embryo, hasn't been born yet, doesn't have any thoughts or wishes or dreams or hopes that it's trying to undertake. It's not sitting there thinking, I've got this life and I've got so much I can do with it. It's not thinking anything. It doesn't exist as a human being who can have thoughts yet, or even one that can act, but the woman does.
What if your daughter gets raped by a man, right? If she gets pregnant from this man, how would you react?
Yeah. Well, really quick, I just want to clarify our stance here. Are we okay or are we against abortions for the other 99.5% of abortions, or no? So are we just bringing up the most extreme case to start right there? I mean, I'd hate to fixate on that and not talk about the other 99.5%.
The guy who's asking about the 95% or whatever the number was of cases that aren't rape, in a way is making a good point, because I think that you can sense there's some defensiveness on the part of the people he's asking, that they don't really want to have to defend abortions that women are choosing for reasons other than rape, cases where their immediate physical health is being threatened. What they're doing is saying what's important is the right, is the ability to make the choice. We're not making a judgment about the choice. We're just saying you need to be able to have the choice. And so they're bringing in the example of the case of rape to as the most extreme example to kind of underscore the need for the choice, at least in those circumstances. And I think that there's a lot of advocates of abortion rights are defensive on this kind of point. They don't really want to explain why abortion can actually be a good thing for women, not because they're in some extreme circumstance, but just because it's something that's going to improve their life. Just because they don't want a child, they didn't plan for a child, it's not where they are in life right now. They'd rather focus on their career. And I think part of the issue there is that most of the people who defend abortion rights happen to come from the left. And the left, they're usually the ones who say, when you're too concerned with your career or with making money or whatever, that's selfish. And that makes it amoral or immoral. So they can't really go there. They can't really take that position. And so they tend to focus just on these cases where the woman is going to suffer some kind of acute tragedy or some kind of suffering if she isn't allowed to have the abortion. And so that's their altruism coming out. That's their view that selflessness is moral. And so we need to be concerned about the suffering of the woman. And I think that's a real fault on the part of the left's defense of abortion rights. They need to be willing to say, no, it's not just that you should have the right to abortion. It's that in America, we believe in the pursuit of happiness. And it's only a right to pursue happiness because we think that it is right for someone to pursue their happiness. And they shouldn't have to sacrifice their happiness to some other person who has no bearing on their life, including a child who they might even be giving birth to, that they don't have to go through that. There's nothing wrong with wanting to be happy, and there's everything that's actually right with it. However, that doesn't mean that the rape example is totally irrelevant. If you go by the logic of the actual anti-abortion position, they have a very hard time explaining why there might be an exception in cases of rape. And there's a reason for that. Because if you think that life begins at conception, and that means that even the tiniest embryo or fetus has rights, the fact that that fetus was the product of rape, it's not obvious why that would change anything about this. Why does the fact that the pregnancy originated in some violation of the woman's rights mean that the fetus now doesn't have rights? It's still got all the qualifications that are supposed to give it rights, according to their theory. It's still got this unique human DNA. If you made an exception and said that, well, because it came from rape, therefore it's okay to abort it, that really is a case of two wrongs seemingly making a right, which doesn't make too much sense. The woman is her rights are violated, but it's no solution to that by their theory for her to now say violate the rights of the fetus. It's not the fetus who's the aggressor here, it's the rapist. She's not stopping the rapist from violating her in the first place by having the abortion. So there's just no logic. The more consistent opponents of abortion, they'll say, no, there shouldn't be exceptions. And a woman who has been raped should just be selfless and sacrifice herself for the sake of the child, because otherwise that would make the child the second victim.
A lot of it can't be reduced how you did, they'd say, because at the inception of this issue is a being forced into a situation that they did not choose, that they did not consent to. And what about this irresponsibility that we allow to proliferate through just basically saying, oh, you just chose to force something into existence, and now your choices can now just kill something just because.
Most important thing to say about it in response is the whole question assumes that you have created a being to whom you have some kind of responsibility. For instance, the responsibility not to violate its rights. The point about responsibility loses its force if you don't think that that being has that status in the first place. And so here's the example that I usually give. If someone goes to work, drives in a car to get to work, and let's say they aren't wearing their seatbelt and they get into an accident and they are injured because of it, they need to go to the hospital. Nobody's going to say to them, well, you made the choice to get in the car and even to not wear your seatbelt. And so the responsible thing to do here is to just accept the consequences and not get any surgery to correct your injuries. No, the responsible thing to do, even if you made a mistake by not wearing your seatbelt in the first place, the responsible thing to do is to fix the mistake. It's to get the surgery and to correct the injuries, and then to resolve to wear your seatbelt in the future. And it's totally parallel to a pregnancy, as long as you assume that the being in question doesn't have any rights.
I want to pause here just for 1 second, because I've heard
Sure.
you give this example before. And I just want to point out that I clarify, you're not saying this accident that you're talking about doesn't involve another person, does it?
Right. Right.
A lot of confusion comes because they think you mean that you're talking about hitting someone else in an accident.
I just mean if you injure nobody but yourself. And you're right that it's different if you hit somebody else, that you will bear some responsibility for that. Just like if a pregnancy created a being who had rights already, then you would kill it and be irresponsible in doing so. But it's the whole parallel brings out the fact that it's only if you're already assuming that the embryo or the fetus has rights, that there's anything about responsibility that makes a difference here. Because if you don't think that it's a being that has rights, then the responsible thing to do is to get the surgery to correct the problem.